They had no idea what they were walking into when they decided to play games with you. When the narcissist thought they could bend your mind, dim your spirit, and control how you felt, they honestly believed their little tricks were pure genius. They assumed you would stay confused, stay loyal, and stay completely trapped inside the web they wove using their charm, manipulation, and empty promises. They truly believed you were simply too empathetic, too trusting, and far too forgiving to ever look past their mask and see the truth. But what they completely failed to realize is that every single lie they told, every moment they tried to gaslight you, and every time they attempted to rewrite reality, they were actually just exposing who they really are. Narcissists never seem to understand this fundamental truth. When you try to break someone who is genuinely good, someone who loves deeply, and someone who gives freely without having any hidden motives, you do not just hurt them. You end up revealing your own inner emptiness. You show the entire world the hollow space behind your fake smile and the deep cracks hidden within your illusion. At the very beginning of it all, they felt powerful. They thought they had you right where they wanted you, under their complete control. They believed they had won every round because you kept questioning your own sanity, because you chose to stay silent through the pain, and because you tried so hard to fix things every time they broke them. Stick around, because what happens next is something they never anticipated. The truth about trying to manipulate a good soul is actually quite simple. You never walk away from that kind of situation untouched. You end up losing the very supply you depended on to survive. You completely destroy the only person who ever looked at you and saw a human being, rather than just an extension of your own fragile ego. You survived their endless cycles of destruction. You endured all the confusion they manufactured. You walked right through those severe emotional storms they created out of nothing. Yet they remained trapped inside those exact same empty patterns, forever chasing the next person to drain and chasing the next life to feed their insatiable ego. They thought you would stay down on the ground. They thought you would never wake up to your true worth. They completely mistook your endless patience for weakness and your deep kindness for pure blindness. But you were never blind to what was happening. You were simply holding on to hope. You were never weak. You were just deeply caring. You were never theirs to control in the first place. You were simply giving them a chance at a real connection that they never truly deserved to receive. And now they watch you rise up, not with any bitterness, not with any desire for revenge, but with total clarity, with real strength, and with a deep peace that they will never be able to experience for themselves. Pay close attention to this part because this shift in energy changes everything for them. You finally broke free from their grip while they stayed right where they have always belonged, hiding behind a fake mask that they are completely unable to live without. They see you rebuilding your life, rising higher and healing into a version of yourself that they never could have imagined. Largely because their vision of you was always restricted by their own small ego. Narcissists are simply incapable of looking past themselves. They only ever saw you as a resource, as a steady supply of energy, and as something to drain until nothing was left. But now they finally see what you actually were all along. Irreplaceable, rare, deep, and genuinely good. They did not just lose another person in their life. They lost the one single person who gave them the kind of pure love, unwavering loyalty, and deep emotional connection that they are never going to encounter again for the rest of their days. And here is the exact thing that torments their mind right now. They did not try to manipulate someone ordinary. They tried to manipulate you. And that single fact is the true source of their ultimate downfall. The damage that narcissists leave behind does not just magically vanish the moment you walk away. It echoes through time and completely rewrites their own identity. At first, they try hard to suppress the raw truth of what they did. They tell themselves over and over that you were just too sensitive, that you expected way too much from them, and that you totally misunderstood them. They invent entire fictional stories inside their heads just to justify their cruel behavior. But those fragile lies can never hold up forever. Reality creeps in slowly, operating in the exact same quiet and ruthless way it always does. It whispers softly whenever they find themselves sitting alone in a room. It speaks up the moment their mask finally slips off. It hits them the hardest when they look out into the world and see you thriving. You are not succeeding in spite of them, but rather because you finally escaped their toxic grasp. What narcissists fail to grasp is that manipulation is an irreversible transaction. They traded your genuine authenticity for their fragile ego. They traded your steady loyalty for their deep-seated insecurity. And they traded your deep trust for a temporary and fake sense of power. In doing so, they cursed themselves to live with the very same emptiness they always tried to project onto you. You take your time rebuilding yourself slowly but surely. Meanwhile, they begin to unravel, quietly and inevitably. You never went out of your way to seek any form of revenge. You never tried to publicly expose them for who they were. You refused to sink down to their low level. Instead, you just step back and let life take care of the accounting. And life has a remarkably brutal way of eventually settling every single score. Everything they poured out comes back around. Everything they poured out into the world around them, including the gaslighting, the constant deception, and the emotional sabotage, comes back around to find them, slowly, methodically, and relentlessly. They end up trapped inside living quarters made of the exact same chaos they spent so much time creating. Their collapse is never loud or dramatic in the beginning. Narcissistic decay always starts privately behind closed doors. Their personal relationships slowly begin to fall apart at the seams. People around them stop trusting a single word they say. Their destructive patterns repeat themselves over and over again. They become total strangers to themselves because you can never build a truly meaningful life when your entire foundation is made of selfishness and manipulation. Maybe they put on a smile when they are out in public. Maybe they laugh louder than anyone else in the room to cover it up. But there is a distinct hollowness behind all of that noise. Now there is a quiet recognition, a lingering shadow that follows them everywhere. They know deep down inside what they actually did. They know what they lost when they let you go. And there is no path left that can take them back to what they permanently destroyed. If you are realizing your own worth right now, leave a comment below and let me know. That is the ultimate curse of narcissistic abuse. Once they lose a truly loving soul from their life, they never truly recover from that loss. But you were never truly destroyed by any of it. You were simply transformed into something stronger. You carry your scars now, yes, but those marks are just living reminders of your incredible strength, your clear vision, and your deep awakening. You did not retaliate against them in anger. You simply elevated yourself, and that rise is the punishment they never saw coming. Let them live out their days in the very world they built for themselves. Let them drown comfortably in the heavy silence that followed the exit of the person who once loved them with total sincerity. Let them finally feel what happens when a narcissist loses someone they never deserved to have in their life in the first place. Because their calculated manipulation was never just a simple mistake on their part. It was a profound revelation, a clear exposure of who they truly are at their core, and a firm confirmation of who you were all along. And now, as you continue to grow day by day with real peace, with personal discipline, and with unshakable self-worth, they can only watch from a distance that will never close the gap. Narcissists always operate under the delusion that they can waltz right back into your life whenever they feel like it. But that is not going to happen this time. Not with you. They had no idea that trying to control your spirit would become the exact thing that exposed their true nature to the world. Yet now they know the reality of it. When a narcissist tries to manipulate someone genuine, they do not just hurt that person for a little while. They end up destroying the last real human connection they will ever have on this earth. They like to tell themselves that it is just a momentary thing, a tiny slip in judgment or a tactical move that they can easily justify away. But emotional abuse is never just a single isolated act. It is a deep fracture that ruins their own identity from the inside out. And it spreads quietly through their system, poisoning everything they touch. This happens because you can never manipulate another human being without ultimately betraying your own soul. Your deeper conscience knows the truth, and your heart knows it too. Even if they try to bury those feelings deep down under thick layers of arrogance, endless excuses, and fake confidence, the truth still lingers. It festers in the dark. It waits patiently for those quiet moments when their social mask finally falls off their face. They tried to tell themselves that they were completely justified in their actions. They claimed that you were being far too sensitive, that you expected way too much, and that you were simply too emotional. But those are just the convenient stories that narcissists use to run away from the raw truth. The absolute truth is that they violated something sacred, and they will never get it back again. There is always a heavy price to pay for that kind of behavior, and it is a steep one. Narcissists never seem to understand that while they were busy trying their hardest to break you down, they were actually dismantling their own character piece by piece. Trying to manipulate someone who genuinely loved them was never a victory. It was simply the beginning of their slow, psychological unraveling. Human life only has any real meaning when it is deeply rooted in honesty, humility, and personal responsibility. Narcissists willingly abandon every single one of those values. They trade away their personal integrity just to feed their ego. They sacrifice genuine human connection just so they can maintain control over someone else. And the resulting chaos that they create around them eventually consumes them from the inside out. They try hard to distract themselves from the quiet with endless noise, with new people, with cheap attention, and with shallow validation. But late at night, when the rest of the world turns quiet, reality shows up at their door. They remember your kindness. They remember your endless patience. And they remember your loyalty. Make sure you keep watching to see how this inner collapse unfolds. They remember how you cared for them when absolutely no one else in the world bothered to. How you gave them love they never deserved to receive. And then they remember what cruel things they did in return. That specific kind of guilt does not just go to sleep. It sneaks its way into all of their new relationships. It actively poisons their ability to form any real connections, because deep down inside, they know exactly who they were with you and what they truly are without you. They know for a fact that they are fully capable of destroying the absolute best thing they ever had. And that haunting knowledge corrodes their minds slowly, quietly, and permanently. You took the time to heal, and you grew stronger through the process. You confronted every single wound they inflicted upon you, and you rose above it all. But narcissists remain permanent prisoners of the exact behaviors they stubbornly refuse to acknowledge. Their guilty conscience refuses to let them go. Their toxic patterns refuse to let them grow as people. Their swollen ego refuses to let them evolve. Something fundamental inside of them died the exact day they tried to dominate your spirit. Something honest, something real, and something deeply human vanished from them. And no amount of external validation can ever resurrect what their own ego ultimately killed off. That is the lasting cost of dealing with narcissistic abuse. It is never just about what they did to hurt you. It is about what they chose to do to themselves in the process. They fractured their own character beyond repair. They completely undermined their own identity. They taught themselves the dangerous lesson that hurting someone kind is somehow acceptable behavior. Once you cross that line within yourself, you permanently lose the ability to build anything truly meaningful in this life. The deeper and more lasting torment truly belongs to them. They know deep down what they threw away so carelessly. They know they actively chose selfishness over love. They know they lost someone who genuinely cared for their well-being. No matter how much they try to spin the narrative to others, and no matter who they try to blame for the fallout, that inner voice inside never stops whispering the truth. You did this to yourself. You lost them for good. You are never going to get them back. So yes, you were hurt deeply by what happened. You carried real wounds, but you chose to heal with absolute dignity. You rose up completely wrapped in clarity, while they, on the other hand, are left standing right in the middle of the smoking ruins of their own terrible behavior. They actually thought that your kindness meant you were weak. They assumed that your deep empathy meant you were submissive. They believed that your patience was just a sign of total dependence. They misunderstood every single thing about who you are. They thought your silence meant you were powerless and afraid. They believed you were far too terrified to ever speak up, too fragile to stand your ground, and way too naive to see straight through their manipulative games. But what they never understood back then, and what they might still not fully grasp even now, is that you were never weak at all. You possessed a deep strength that their fragile egos could never hope to comprehend. True strength does not always have to roar to be noticed. It does not need to explode in sudden outbursts of anger or lash out with petty acts of vengeance. Real strength, the kind that is solidly forged out of self-respect, personal discipline, and clear vision, usually appears calm, completely composed, and completely unshakable. And that exact quality was yours. You carried a quiet strength that refused to panic, and you chose not to waste precious words on someone who was entirely incapable of truly listening. They assumed you were easy to manipulate simply because you did not react to every single insult they threw your way, because you did not fight every minor slight, and because you never begged them for recognition. You gave them plenty of breathing room, not because you were totally blind to their obvious red flags, but because you genuinely hoped they might show some character. That kind of intentional restraint and quiet grace made you dangerous to them in the most subtle, dignified way possible. Your silence was never an agreement to their behavior. Your steady patience was never a sign of surrender. Instead, you were quietly watching, listening, taking careful stock of the situation, and letting their true nature reveal itself naturally. Over and over again, they failed the test, yet you managed to remain kind, not because you were blind or naive or weak, but because you simply refused to allow their toxic behavior to harden your own heart. That takes an immense amount of real power. It is not the destructive power to tear things down, but rather the powerful ability to remain completely whole, centered, and unshaken, even while standing right next to someone who has been trained in the arts of manipulation. And when you finally decided to walk away, when your silence turned into permanent distance, they had no earthly idea how to handle it. People who thrive on controlling others and exploiting people emotionally always panic the moment their target finally detaches. They are completely used to extracting constant drama and feeding off your emotional reactions. But you gave them absolutely nothing to feed on. You gave them space. And inside that quiet space, you let life handle the rest. The crushing weight became theirs. The crushing weight of their own terrible choices became theirs and theirs alone to carry, which turned out to be far heavier than any shouting match, confrontation, or logical argument could ever be. They drastically underestimated the psychological damage of your silence. This was not the silence born of cold indifference, but rather the profound silence of someone who has finally seen the brutal truth, accepted it completely, and chosen to protect and preserve themselves. That specific kind of silence is entirely decisive. It remains calm, completely controlled, and final. It feels like a turbulent storm finally settling down deep within your soul, accompanied by the powerful realization that maintaining your personal dignity and self-respect matters far more than trying to win an argument or prove a point to someone who refuses to understand. Anyone can scream at the top of their lungs when they are hurting. Anyone can lash out in blind anger. But it takes an entirely different kind of inner fortitude to feel every single heavy emotion, including the bitter betrayal, the constant manipulation, and the cruel gaslighting, and still make the conscious choice not to become bitter yourself. That was the choice you made every single day. You chose to rise above it instead of raging, and you chose to become a better person rather than letting them break you down. They genuinely thought they had defeated you in the end. They thought your quiet demeanor meant you were empty inside. They assumed your patience was just disguised fear, and your grace was simply weakness. But during that exact period of silence, you were busily rebuilding your life, reflecting on your path, processing the trauma, and leveling up in ways they could never possibly see or understand. Beneath that outward calm and composure lived a fierce resolve that they could never measure or take away from you. You were never stuck where you were. You were never powerless. You were simply preparing for your next chapter. You stood back and allowed their own chaos to expose them, while you quietly grew far beyond the reach of their control. And that is exactly what happened. Now they can see the reality of it. They see you thriving, smiling freely without needing any validation from them, and living a full life without their presence. And that sight completely unsettles them.